Dr. Jane Parmley has had a very interesting career, and I'm sure it is going to go on because she became a veterinarian in 1998 and then practiced as an active veterinarian on Vancouver Island. So hello to Vancouver Island. Jane then enrolled in graduate studies at the University of Guelph and received a PhD in epidemiology in 2005. Then she had a period of working at various interesting jobs as a veterinarian, and at the moment, she is an associate professor at the University of Guelph. She's in the One Health department of the University of Guelph. That One Health is an important thing to understand. Most recently, she's working on new methods to find and assess clues that may be used to predict threats to humans and animals and help decrease the vulnerability of humans and animals to those threats. She also works with a community in practice and in ecosystem health, and is a lead in a course on, or that course on ecosystem health, and it's a course with a webinar series as well. So her main interest apparently continues to be the interconnectedness between human, domestic animal, wildlife, and environmental health. So welcome, Dr. Jane Parmley. We're very keen to have you present, and we're pleased to be here tonight.
So again, thanks for that introduction, and thank you all for being here and joining on the line tonight. These talks are always fun to do. I think they're usually more fun in person than they are in this sort of online environment. But I'm hoping that we can recreate some of that dialogue and discussion that in-person meetings have. So, and I'm just going to move along here. So to make this virtual platform a little bit more engaging, I've inserted a few questions throughout the beginning of the presentation anyway, using a program called Mentimeter. And so what I'd like to ask each of you to do is to take your phone or to minimize this screen on your computer and go to menti.com. And you can see the website there at the top. And then you type in the code that's there, 2835272. And I'll give you just a minute to do that. And I thought what I'd start with is a question to get us comfortable with the technology, and because I'm curious about who everyone is on the line. And so I was hoping that you could take a minute and tell me a little bit about yourself. So on that slide, you'll see an opportunity to enter a few words, and I can do it first, and you'll see what they show up like on the screen. So I am a vet. I am an epidemiologist. Don't worry about your spelling, because I can't spell either. Epidemiology. And I am calling in from Kitchener, Ontario, which is just outside of Guelph. And you should be able to see it show up on the screen. Great. We'll just give a couple minutes to let people do this. Camp professional, dogs, communication, animal welfare, animal enthusiast. All righty. So that gives me an idea. Ooh, a naturopathic doctor. Excellent. Unwell. Oh, an environmental lawyer, an ex-hockey player. Excellent. Okay. It's always hard because they change positions as they come in. But it looks like we have a variety of different people with different interests and different professional backgrounds. So I'm gonna move on to the next slide. I don't think that should stop you from filling it in, but I'm just gonna move along. But that helps. Thank you for doing that. That gives me an idea. And we're gonna come back to Menti a couple of times, as I mentioned, over the course of tonight. So this is essentially what I want to cover this evening. I'm hoping it will take about 30 minutes, which should leave us plenty of time for questions and conversation at the end, because that's the part I love about these opportunities, is the chance to have conversations and explore these health topics that I find really quite fascinating. But I want to start with this question: what is health? And it's a word that we throw around all the time, but I don't, and I don't think many of us take the time to really think about what it means, or who or what the term applies to. So I'm going to take us through a series of pictures, and they're just photographs that'll appear on the slide. And then we're going to come back to this question after that: what is health? As you look at the photos, what do you think about? Do any of the pictures capture what health means to you? So I'll just spend about 5 seconds on each one. And that's the end of those photos. So what did those images make you think about? Which ones represented health? And as you think about your answers to these questions, take an opportunity to go back to Mentimeter and type in a few words that represent health to you. And don't worry, there's no right or wrong answers. And I'm not going to be able to link the answers that I see on the screen to the people that I can see on the meeting. So go ahead and take a minute and just type in what health means to you. And I'll do the same. So there's lots of connected, community, connection, contribution, environment, peace, energy, well-being, resilience, humans, water. That's great. And I think those are all part of health, and those are great ideas and thoughts. Now I have to capable, yep, collective, whole, mental, physical, and emotional, absolutely. Land, nice, great. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time sort of exploring this word cloud, and I'm also not going to spend a ton of time thinking about these definitions. But I do want to highlight that our definition and understanding of what health is has changed over time. And I think that if many of us are just asked this question in passing, often our first response is not diseased. We can define health by what it isn't, not by what it is. And that definition from the World Health Organization that's there in the middle from 1948 is still the currently accepted sort of main standard definition of health. And just recognizing that it's not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Key for me is that health really over the last probably 2 or 3 decades has emerged as this ability to cope with change. And often the word we associate with that or use to describe that capability is resilience, which we saw there on the slide previously as well. The other thing I want to point out with these definitions too is that they are all pretty human-centric, but all of these ideas hold for companion animals, livestock, ecosystems, and wildlife as well, but maybe with slight nuances to them. In public health, there's been a lot of discussion about and research on determinants of health. And those are the things that determine if we are healthy or not. What you see on the slide is not really an exhaustive list. Obviously, there are other things that are missing, things like genetics. But essentially what a determinants of health approach recognizes is that the context in which people, in this case, but also animals live, determines whether they are healthy or not. And I actually just came across a headline in the Toronto Star from yesterday, which was sort of covering an interview by Theresa Tam, the Chief Medical Health Officer for Canada. And the headline was, "How will COVID-19 affect you? Your postal code matters as much as your genetic code." And really it's about like the fact that where you live and who you live with and what's in your surrounding environment really determines whether or not you are healthy. And I'm going to come back to this slide a bit later in the presentation. So that's health. Now, what's One Health? And before I answer that question, I want you to think about the big issues that we are facing today. So let's go back to Mentimeter one last time. And I want you to type in a few of the big health challenges that you think are most important today. And these can be for people, they can be for animals, they can be for the environment. It doesn't matter, just those big health challenges. So go ahead and take a minute to type those in. Right. So we have a lot of big things: climate change, mental health, COVID-19, yeah, pandemic, nutrition, accessibility, disease, inequality. Great combination of things here. Disconnection from nature, human technology, sensitivity to things, health insurance. That's a great list. And when I look at that, and maybe what I'll ask what you think when you look at it, but that's difficult to have as a conversation. But for me, the things that really jump out are that these are all kind of really big problems with lots of moving parts that are difficult or have proven to be difficult to solve. And for me, these are the things that represent One Health challenges. So I'm glad that worked out. And what I mean by that is that One Health offers a framework to best tackle these big, messy problems, those things that you typed in on the screen, whether that be by solving current issues, preventing future ones, or being able to cope with change. To me, One Health as a concept, sorry, my dog is here at my side. To me, One Health as a concept speaks to the interconnectedness of human health, animal health, and environmental health. How is my health connected with your health, with livestock animals, and with the forests and lakes that surround us? As an approach, One Health really represents the collaborative effort of many disciplines, and they're not just disciplines, it's just any knowledge from a variety of perspectives to attain optimal health for humans, animals, and the environment. I just want to flag that One Health is sort of a bit of a buzzword right now. But it's one of many different holistic approaches to health that really focus on the interconnections. Other names that you might have heard about and that Jocelyn mentioned at the beginning are things like ecosystem approaches to health, eco-health, or planetary health, and there's a whole host of other ones. And while there are probably some important differences between them, they're essentially all trying to do the same thing. And that means looking at interconnections. What is affecting the health in these different areas? How each one is contributing either positively or negatively to the other. And I wanted to spend a few minutes exploring One Health as a concept. This idea that the health of humans, animals, and the environment are interconnected. And I want to do this using antimicrobial resistance as an example. And I picked this for a variety of reasons. One, I think it's a really good example that sort of demonstrates One Health as a concept. And two, more of a selfish reason, I guess, is that prior to joining the University of Guelph last year, I spent 12 years with the Public Health Agency of Canada doing antimicrobial resistance surveillance across Canada. So I have a bit of a bias and a bit of an interest in the topic area. But first, I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what antimicrobial resistance is. Basically, it's a characteristic of microorganisms or bacteria, and a bacteria is resistant when it can survive and replicate in the presence of antimicrobials or antibiotics at levels that normally suppress their growth or kill them. I go back and forth between the term antimicrobial and antimicrobial resistance and antibiotic resistance. Essentially, I'm going to use them interchangeably this evening. And for the most part, I'm talking about antibiotic resistance. Just recognize that the issue as a whole is bigger than just against bacteria and about antibiotics. Antimicrobial resistance can be natural or acquired. And what I mean by that is that some bacteria are inherently resistant to some antibiotics simply because of their structure and behavior. But other ones can acquire new bits of genetic code and become resistant. We think of the use of any antimicrobial, any sort of antibiotic, as being able to select for resistance. But it's important to recognize that not all resistant bacteria are harmful. Resistance in a microorganism that is happily living in our gut and helping us to digest our food isn't a problem. It becomes a problem when the bacteria or the viruses or the parasites get into the wrong place and cause us problems that we then need to fight off. So why is antimicrobial resistance a problem? First, there are more and more bacteria, the good ones and the bad, that are exhibiting resistance. And these resistant infections in humans and animals are increasing disease or morbidity, death or mortality, and our healthcare costs. But the impacts are even more dire than that. Antibiotics are absolutely amazing drugs, and by reducing death and preventing and controlling bacterial infections, they have enabled the development of modern medicine. It's because we have antibiotics and antibiotics that work and are able to control infections that many life-saving medical advances, things like cancer chemotherapy or other procedures that improve quality of life, like hip or knee replacements, are possible. Not only are antimicrobials the foundation of modern medicine, they have also allowed for growth of modern agriculture. And through routine use in livestock agriculture, we have successfully improved feed efficiency, which means we can produce food more efficiently and profitably in many parts of the world. So as resistance grows and becomes more common, food security and our ability to practice effective medicine are threatened. And a recent report by the Council of Canadian Academies summarized what could happen if antibiotics continue to fail. And that was the title of their report, When Antibiotics Fail. This was the first estimate that they put out is about death. So currently over 5,000 Canadians die every year as a direct result of resistance. And if current trends continue and resistance becomes more common, that number is predicted to more than double by the year 2050. Even more sobering, The O'Neill report that came out from the UK a few years ago predicted that 10 million lives would be lost annually around the world by 2050 as a direct cause of antimicrobial resistance. Healthcare costs are also predicted to rise in Canada due to treatment failures, complications from bacterial infections, and others. And the economic impacts are not only going to be felt in the healthcare sector, but will have widespread impacts across the Canadian economy. And this is also predicted to rise by the year 2050. Lastly, the health and economic costs are quite staggering, but it's the social impacts of resistance that are expected to outweigh the economic costs. And like COVID-19, the impacts are not, will not be experienced equally by all Canadians. And that reflects back, or that sort of, I think, recognizes the importance of the determinants of health, and that context, and in this case, your postal code, probably matter. It's not the most uplifting story. So let's try to explore what we can do about it and how One Health can help. Oops. This is often how we think about the problem of antimicrobial resistance. Use of antibiotics selects for resistant bacteria, and the more we use the drugs, the more resistance there will be. But it isn't quite that simple. We should really consider the different species and places where antibiotics are used and how they contribute to the resistance. Just this image alone represents probably one of the biggest debates in the area of antimicrobial resistance. And that question is, how much does antimicrobial use in animals contribute to human resistant infections? And the honest answer to that question globally is we don't know, and it depends. It depends on the particular bacteria that you're talking about. It depends on which drug you're talking about, and it's not one answer, and it's not one question. Adding on another layer of complexity, resistant bacteria can move directly between people and animals. Think about individuals living on farms, or those of us with dogs or cats or other pets in our homes. But resistant bacteria can also move between people and animals in food products, raw meat, contaminated vegetables, prepared foods, or through the environment in things like water. Think about swimming or drinking water when you're camping. And it doesn't stop there. There are all sorts of factors that influence how much and what antimicrobials we use, and others that affect who or what come into contact with resistant bacteria. Let's just take this idea of antimicrobial use in animals. What factors would influence or affect an animal owner's desire to seek out antimicrobials for their animal, whether that be a pet in this case, or maybe a livestock animal. But let's start with the pet. If we think about that, and I had my dog here earlier, what are some of the reasons that I might want to use antibiotics in my pet? Probably it's because of infection, but maybe in a companion animal, it's also about an elective surgery. Maybe they're getting older and they have some joint pain and they're gonna have some sort of corrective surgery. For livestock species, maybe it's for disease treatment, often maybe disease prevention, or even growth promotion. And that's been a common use for antibiotics in livestock animals historically, but that practice is changing. And it probably depends on, there's a whole host of factors that depends on, how those animals are housed on the farm, where those animals came from in the first place, how old they are, and many other considerations. In people, antibiotic use is affected by disease. If you have an infection, they can help, if it's a bacterial infection anyway. Past experience, things like, I took these before and they made me feel better, so I'd like to take them again. Inflexible working conditions, are you able to take sick days off? Or do you need to have something that will make you feel better right away? Or your children, do they need to go to school because you don't have the ability to stay home? And so there's all sorts of different factors that come into place. It's not a simple drugs cause resistance. And recognizing this mess of interconnections, a few years ago, we set out to talk to people who weren't normally part of the antimicrobial resistance conversation. We talked with teachers, with lawyers, with farmers, with pharmacists, with food security experts, animal welfare groups, and many others to ask them about how they contributed to growing antimicrobial resistance in Canada and how they were affected by it. And this was the messy system that we started those conversations with. And as we went through several series of focus groups, this image just became more and more complicated and more messy. And we've repeated the process in Asia and in Europe as well. And similar trends kind of emerge. And there's all sorts of pieces here. Down on the bottom left, there's all sorts of agricultural factors, stocking densities, disease on the farm, that kind of thing. It spills into an environmental realm sort of here. Down here, there's all sorts of economic considerations. These are sort of individual health issues. And then there's sort of consumer demand, research, and a whole hodgepodge of things up here on the top left. As we went through that process and had those conversations, we also recognized there's a whole bunch of factors that we didn't know how to put on here. Things like climate change, the media, power and governance. All of these have big influences on what we do and what decisions we make, but we weren't sure how to put them into the image. We're currently and continuing to work with these non-traditional stakeholders to identify key points for intervention, along with increasingly strict rules around antimicrobial use, particularly in animals. Many of the areas identified, or many of the participants identified factors that wouldn't only affect resistance, but many of the health challenges you identified earlier. Some of the areas of focus were poverty alleviation, proper sanitation, access to safe food and water, and education. And a recent graduate student of mine who just finished in the spring analyzed this messy figure and tried to determine what the most influential points in this image were. And the one that came up more often than others was consumer demand for product and willingness to pay. And to me, this means that the choices that you and I make at the grocery store or at the mall or whatever with our dollars can make a difference, and likely because it's connected to many of the different parts of this system. So that was One Health as a concept. Now I'm going to change tack, and I want to explore One Health as an approach that brings together knowledge from different perspectives to maximize or improve the health of all species. And we could talk about antimicrobial resistance here again as an example, but I thought I would change the topic to wildlife conservation, which is another area that I like to work in and have a particular interest in. So does wildlife health matter? And I think for me anyway, the answer is a definite yes, but why does it matter? And one of the first reasons that I think most of us identify, particularly today, is that wild animals can be sources of infectious and non-infectious disease. And they can transmit these diseases to people and domestic animals and to other wildlife. The diseases that come to mind, like just from these images here, are maybe rabies and livestock predation for the wolf, chronic wasting disease for the deer, avian influenza from ducks and geese in that image, brucellosis and tuberculosis perhaps in these bison, and maybe mercury poisoning in the shellfish example on the far right. And this figure is from 2017, but it shows many of the emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases around the world. Some you've likely heard about, things like Zika virus, Ebola, SARS, West Nile virus, antimicrobial resistant threats are up there as well. SARS-CoV-2 is not yet there, but I'm sure it will be added shortly. In addition to sort of figures like this that show these emerging diseases, there have been several papers put out over the last 10 or 15 years, really characterizing these emerging infectious diseases. And most of them report that emerging infectious diseases are dominated by zoonoses, those diseases that move from animals to people. And it's estimated that about 60% of emerging infectious diseases originate from animals or are zoonotic. Most of those, over 70%, are thought to originate in wildlife. For example, SARS, Ebola, or even the COVID-19 virus that we're dealing with today. And the other issue is that these emerging infectious diseases are becoming more and more common. But why is that? Why are they becoming more common? And for me, there are sort of four main reasons. First and foremost, there are more of us and we're living in more and different places. And as a result, there are more spaces and areas where we can interact and intersect with wild animal populations. With our growing human population, demand for animal protein is increasing, and we're keeping more animals often in smaller spaces and in new areas. The high density of some production systems can allow for pathogens to replicate very quickly. And as agriculture expands into new areas, new and different wild animal contact can create opportunities for diseases to move into new hosts and new diseases to emerge. We move around a lot, and we also move animals and animal products a lot, including a pretty healthy trade in wildlife, healthy illegal trade in wildlife. And this means that diseases that were once localized on one continent can be spread quickly to another. In North America, we saw that in 1999 when West Nile virus emerged in New York State. And it's believed that it was brought into the US through an infected mosquito, likely through air travel. And I think we've definitely all experienced that globalization and rapid spread of disease with the COVID-19 pandemic this year. And then there's the issue of climate change, and probably not just climate change, but our ever-changing socioeconomic and political systems as well. Just this year, we've seen unprecedented forest fires in the Western US and Australia that have killed people, domestic animals, and wild animals. It's destroyed homes of many and made food access more precarious, whether you are a person or a wild animal. These fires and the destruction of their habitat have pushed wildlife into new locations as they try to escape these threats, and then cause more intersection with our domestic animals and people again. Less dramatic, perhaps, we are seeing range expansion of things like ticks into new areas where they are also able to spread disease to potentially new hosts. But wildlife are not always bad. They are not the enemy. They contribute to income, social status, culture, and working conditions in Canada. Just a few estimates. Nature-related activities like ecotourism, hunting, and fishing generate over $40 billion annually to the Canadian economy. Hunting, fishing, ecotourism are major employers. Safe and secure fish and wild populations are a foundation for northern and rural food security in Canada as well. Not only that, but wildlife can be really important sentinels of environmental change. By observing wild animal populations, we can detect changing levels of pollutants and infectious diseases in our environment. And wildlife population declines have inspired new laws and regulations that have reduced human exposures to toxins in the past. To circle back to that idea of emerging disease, healthy wildlife are much less likely to spread disease to each other or to people or to domestic animals than unhealthy wildlife. And so it is important to keep all of us as healthy as we can to reduce that transmission risk and to keep to improve our resilience. So how is One Health helping us to understand the interconnections between wildlife and humans? You saw this figure earlier about the determinants of health, and wildlife contribute to many of these human determinants, and they also share many of those determinants together. To explore this further, what we are doing right now is working with wildlife and public health experts and community leaders to recognize key determinants of health in each sector, to then identify determinants that overlap and find signals from nature that can inspire action to improve the health of wildlife and humans. Our intention with that work is that wildlife health will be recognized as public health and help drive long-term multi-sector actions and policies that promote health, increase resilience, and reduce vulnerability of all species. in my mind, wildlife are worth protecting, not just for their own sake, but for ours too, and all living things on the planet. And it's going to require all of us to work together to meet that goal. And that brings me nearly to the end of the presentation. I hope I've been able to introduce you to some new ideas, to give you a few new ideas and new things to think about. I do want to emphasize that while these issues appear overwhelming, small individual actions can make a difference. And our choices at the grocery store or at the mall, our choice of transportation, how we spend our leisure time, all of these things do have an impact. And if we do them together, we can make some changes. And I think that's been a challenge for a lot of our students in this area, is to recognize where and how you can make a difference and not be overwhelmed by the mess and the complexity of some of these challenges. Before I leave though, I do want to share a few places where you can find more information, particularly about One Health. And I also want to flag that next week on November 3rd, I think that's Tuesday, it's One Health Day. And there's a whole host of activities planned worldwide. And you can find some of those on the One Health platform at that link at the bottom of the page. Locally, if you are interested, and this is more of a plug for the University of Guelph, we have a One Health Pavilion at the Royal Agricultural Virtual Experience, otherwise known as the Winter Fair. It should be a great place to explore some of the new One Health programs that Guelph is developing, and to hear from individuals from different backgrounds who have all found their way to One Health. And that's that panel discussion on November 11th at 4:45. And I think if you use that QR code down in the bottom right of the screen, it will take you to where you can find all that information, or you can just go to that link there about the Royal Winter Fair. And I think that is everything. I was just going to end on this cartoon. I think it sort of encapsulates that idea that most of our big health challenges today are messy and complex. And our answers, I think, to these challenges need to be messy and complex as well. And if they're too simple, they're probably not correct and they're wrong. So that's the end of what I have prepared. I would love to have some questions or comments or thoughts about some of these topics and about One Health. And I'd be happy to hear from you. Thanks.
To do is continue to thrive and adapt to all these new challenges that surely are coming our way.